Hey everyone, I'm the Wrathful Poser, and this is the Ink Noir podcast compilation of episodes 1 through 5. Expose the truth about Anne Perry, Pauline Parker, and the murder of Honora. We learn the unfiltered facts of what Pauline Parker's life was really like. Her constant abuse and neglect, blamed for her own sexual assault, about how Anne Perry was constantly villainized.
I knew it was wrong, and I knew I would have to pay for it, and I knew it was stupid. But I was terrified that she really would take her life and it would be my fault.
We'll discuss media manipulation and a bitter true crime author who purposely fabricated events and conversations to sell his version. And the famous film over-dramatized and packed with lies. For 71 years, her story has been twisted, retold, or ignored. That ends with me, right now. When director and co-writers Peter Jackson and partner Fran Walsh released Heavenly Creatures in 1994, it still managed to strike a nerve. It renewed interest in the 40-year-old crime and the two girls at the center of the brutal murder of Honora Parker, Juliet Hulme and the victim's own daughter, Pauline. Too juicy of a scoop to ignore, media began searching the two women out, and eventually they were found, no longer teenagers, but middle-aged women. And after spending almost 5.5 years in prison, the two women had been released in secret. They moved out of New Zealand and changed their names in hopes to start over. Juliet became better known as best-selling mystery writer Anne Perry. Both women dreamt of becoming writers since childhood, but Anne was destined to make it true. When journalists found her, she was surrounded by a close-knit and fiercely loyal team of friends and colleagues. They felt the news of the movie claiming Anne to be Juliet was ridiculous, and at first they didn't believe the story. But Anne told them, "You have to, because it's all true." She told the media she has not spoken to Pauline since their sentences began in 1954, and besides wishing her old friend well, Perry and her team refused to answer any more questions. Finding Anne Perry wasn't hard at all. She wasn't exactly hiding. However, finding Pauline, or now Hilary Nathan, was proving more difficult. After some time, Nathan was found, living almost like a recluse, an extremely simple life. Her home was barely furnished, she didn't own a phone, and she ate mostly easy meals like sandwiches. Some media gained access to Nathan's property under false pretenses, taking her off guard. And when confronted with these questions, Nathan denied ever being Pauline and said she was only ever known as Hilary, and she refused to speak to them any further. But of course, they didn't believe her, and so to appease the ever-prodding press, her older sister Wendy came forward as her spokeswoman. Wendy told everyone her sister has spent her life praying and asking for forgiveness. And though extremely simple, Wendy told media that Hilary had a good life. She obtained her university degree while incarcerated, and once out of prison, Nathan became a special needs educator and eventually ran a horse stable, teaching kids to ride and care for horses. She was also an extremely devout Roman Catholic, attending church daily. The people who knew Hilary from church or work were stunned. How could the woman they knew be a killer? Sure, she was a little quirky, but overall she was nice and gentle and kind. The circle of supporters surrounding Anne had a similar thought. How could this be true about the loving and wonderful human they knew? And who the hell really was Anne Perry and Hilary Nathan? The story was back making headlines and spreading faster and further than ever before, thanks to the 24-hour news cycle. And even without the internet, this true story of two killer teens who killed for love was gaining new interest. Now there was a movie and a soundtrack to it. There have been countless works influenced from this case, like films and docudramas and stage plays, novels, and nonfiction crime books. One such book claims to be the only complete true telling of this case, and that their work is completely biographical and the lead source. As part of my investigation into this crime and this case, this book, among many others, is just a few things I will be diving into to see where the truth lies in this story. Because why would someone claim their book is the one and only complete resource and disregard all other works done by scholars and academics? That would pave the way for others, assuming that it's correct, and adding to a long list of retellings of the same incorrect, prejudicial beliefs, regurgitations of poorly researched, unchecked, and sensationalized partial facts with outdated information and diary entries taken out of context or worse, completely falsified. In an interview about Heavenly Creatures, filmmakers said they wanted to show a more sympathetic view of the girls. And so, in this version, they took pieces of a teenage diary, which had fictional stories and poems, chunks of highly sus research from the defense psychologist who not only embarrassed the court with their theory, but it also got completely tossed out. And then add this to the gossip from the backstabbing friend of the family who became a source for the movie, mix them all up, and you have Heavenly Creatures. One long hot topic of conversation is if the girls were truly lesbians. What was the impact of that on this murder case and within the conservative community of Christchurch? Then what was it about this case that has interested millions of people all over the world for the last 7 decades? Strangely enough, even with all this media coverage and movies and dime store novels and crime anthologies, another question that often pops up but is not often explored is, who was Honora Parker? Who was the victim? She was the mother of one of the convicted teens, yet she's all but overlooked. Other than the movie portrayal of Honora and even her husband Herbert, there's really not much discussed about either of them. But the movie versions of who they seem to be is not a correct picture of who they really were, and you might be surprised at the secrets they were hiding. Why does it matter? The two girls were convicted. They went to prison. Who cares? Why bother looking into a case that not only happened decades ago in another country? Why look at it at all? It was solved. We know who did it. But there's still questions that ring in my head about what harm did the media do? And what are the ethical issues when reporting on cases like this? Is it important? And simply put, every story is important and every crime has something to teach us. So let's deep dive into Peter Jackson's Heavenly Creatures. But before that, hi, and welcome to Ink Noir, the podcast where the worlds of true crime and the craft of writing collide. I'm your host, the Wrathful Proser, and this is the debut episode and season of Ink Noir. I invite you to join me into looking into crimes committed by writers and authors. Anne Perry's case is much bigger than I imagined, and I only expected 1 or 2 episodes per writer, but digging into this has really exploded, and it's going to be a multi-part YouTube podcast hybrid project. So thank you to everyone who's joining me and coming along for this unexpected and crazy ride. There's discussions of very sensitive issues, which include sexual and physical abuse. So please, listening and viewing discretion is advised. My opinions are my own, and they're based on my research and experiences. This is for educational and entertainment purposes. healthy and mature discussions from all angles are encouraged, but trolls will be discarded with the rest of the trash. The murder of Honora Reaper Parker and her two murderers, which was her 16-year-old daughter, Pauline, with the help of Pauline's friend, 15-year-old Juliet. For those who know a little bit more about this case, Juliet is actually Anne Perry. These two girls spent 5.5 years in prison for this murder. Nobody is saying they didn't do this. They 100% did this. I started going over some things that I had, like other sources and videos. And for other creators who have spent tons of time on this, there's a profiler who did this for about, she has an episode like an hour and a half. There's another content creator, a larger one, Stephanie Harlow. And I want to take a moment to talk about her coverage of this murder. This is nothing against her. I just want to show the amount of information. So the profiler, which is well known, Pat Brown, did about, like an hour and a half on this. And Stephanie Harlow has a 4-part series. And it's, I think, about 5 to 6 hours. And she didn't even scratch the surface. But she's not digging the way I'm digging. Just goes to show you how much, 5 to 6 hours. And she barely scratched what is really happening in this case. And like, that's how much information. Just think, just what you can find on the internet. Everything like newspaper articles, anything that people have said about them. I want to start off also saying this. 2 things can be true. A few things can be true at a few times. And it's important for me to say this because there's going to be people who look at this differently. You can be a victim of a horrible crime, such as this, a murder. She was killed brutally. But you can also be a horrible person. That doesn't mean that you deserve this type of final treatment, that you're bad, so you deserve to be killed. That's not even relatively close to what I am saying. This crime should have and could have been 100% like completely avoidable. This crime was completely avoidable. When you have parents such as Honora and Herbert and Hilda and Henry, there are a lot of things that we see about them, and a lot of it is the time. And that's why it's important to always keep in mind that this happened in the 1950s, and there was no word for lesbian. And obviously there was lesbian, but there was not, and I say this in air quotes, because when this happened in 1954 in New Zealand, women and men didn't know there was a word for gay women. They knew that gay men were gay men and that homosexuality was illegal at this time and also morally wrong, seen as a mental illness. And there was already a huge situation going on in government called the Lavender Scare, which is supposed to be a play off the Red Scare. Ha 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 ha. Because gay men and communism are so close together. You know, when I think of one, I always think of the other. So this Lavender Scare, they're trying to get all the homosexuals out of government, and there was a huge wave of men who were told get out. Then when this happened and people started realizing that women too could be gay, I'm sure that the minds were blown. These 2 girls, they were abused. Now I'm going to talk about
more so Pauline when it comes to that, because there were situations with Juliet and Perry and her parents. But her parents, her mother, Hilda, as much as people spoke about her and said, they just said all these negative things about her, the Hume family, Anne Perry, Juliet Hume's family, are doing way better than Pauline's family. And I'm going to tell you why. Because once upon a time, Herbert and Honora got together. There are specific scenes in Heavenly Creatures. If you have not seen the movie, there's going to be spoilers. If you want to, you can go. I'll put a link on this video. But if you go on my website, you can there's a link and it'll bounce you right back to YouTube, because there's another channel who has it. So I'll link it to them. You can see the full film. Okay. And you need to understand, the film Heavenly Creatures was done in 1994. This was 40 years after this murder of Honora Reaper Parker happened. Her married name, also air quotes, was Reaper, because what happened was, back in ye olden times, you had to get married. It was, if you did not get married, something was wrong with you. So you had to get married. You had to have kids. It was seen as selfish if you didn't want a family. So again, there are generational and societal pressures also behind this. So we have four parents, I should say, two sets of parents. And Herbert was married to someone else. And when I say was because he is no longer with us. He passed, I think, in the 80s. I have to double check. I have so many notes, guys. You have no idea how much stuff, which is why I'll probably give some rants. There's so much stuff. It's taken me so long, and I want to share it because Herbert and Honora Reaper Parker were shitty people. That's right. I'm going to say it again. Herbert Reaper and the murder victim, unfortunately, in this case, Honora, were two of the worst parents and human beings. Now, on a scale of 1 to a tiny little Austrian man with a stupid little mustache who screams at people, she's not evil, okay? But if we're talking a good human being, these two people were not it. Hilda Hume and Henry Hume, they get crapped on. And you know what? A lot of things that they did were not cool. Back in this time period, men especially were very hands-off. Traditional gender roles were the popular thing to do. That was life. You didn't have choices. And that's what everyone saw. People wanted, this is mom, dad, children, happy life, picket fence, great job. This is what life was after World War II. And even though during this time there's a Korean War, the two world wars really, really destroyed planet Earth as far as the people. I'm not even talking about places that were bombed or destroyed. I'm just talking about people. They came out of a Great Depression and then had to struggle through wars. So there's a lot of issues. And I try to take every consideration. The relationship that Herbert had with Honora is something that I see as a connection, an emotional connection that I recognize in my own relationship with my partner. He and I we're partners. We're married, but we are partners. And we have such a deep love for each other that when you read something like this, whatever you have, whether it's your spouse, whether it's, a good friend, kick on that empathy and really put yourself in this person's shoes. It's a tragic story. It's horrible, but there is more to it. Herbert was married before. He was married to a woman, Louise, and she was older than him, about 15 years. They met when he was in the army and he was stationed in Cairo. They met and they got married and they had children. They had 2 sons. So remember, this is Pauline's dad. He had a wife and 2 children. We then hear about this first wife when he talks to anybody about it, such as the police in this case, and when he told Honora, who he met at work, that's how they met, he told her that his wife, Louise, was very violent and abusive to him, that she would scream at him and rage. She slept with a knife under her bed and had threatened him. So he's telling Honora all this, and she wants to help him. In the movie Heavenly Creatures, there's going to be some spoilers, guys, so I'm going to be bouncing back and forth. There's a part in the movie where Pauline says to her mom, I know about you and Dad. You met him, you ran away with him at 17. This is Peter Jackson's way of introducing this little tidbit that Honora had also been in a relationship when she was younger. This is a part of the movie where she's confronting Pauline after Pauline was in bed with John/Nicholas, his name is John Nicholas. I think Nicholas is his middle name. Pauline is 14. John Nicholas is an assistant college professor. Let me say it again for the poo-pooers in the back. Pauline Parker, daughter of Honora Reaper Parker, okay? 14, when they, quote, discovered her in bed with John. He is an adult. She is 14. Now, at the time of the murder, she was 16. And 16 is the age of consent for many states, for many countries. New Zealand, they used to have their age of consent was, I believe, 14. And in the 1800s, they bumped it up to 16. So in any way, she was, trigger warning, guys, essay discussions, okay? Pauline was raped. If you watch the movie, Pauline is in bed with this guy. And the father walks in, Herbert, and he catches them in bed. And he tells Pauline, whose middle name is Yvonne, and her parents call her Yvonne. That's their pet name, their nickname for her middle name. He says, you have broken my heart, and then leaves the room. Excuse me, she's broken your heart? What about the 25-year-old dude in bed with your underage child? The age of consent, I'm going to say it again, 1954 was 16. Her sexual relationship with this man happened before she was 16. So think about that. You find out this 14-year-old is in bed with a probably 25-year-old. Pauline's diaries were published. We have huge chunks of her actual diaries. And in them, she talks about the boarders in her home. Their home was a boarding house, which was a respectable business. They were not looked down upon because of that. They lived in a more poor area, which also class is discussed a lot, but I'll go on another tangent. So let me try and stick with this one. Her parents sucked. Her parents sucked. So not only do we have this sexual assault, which is way more worse. I don't want to keep saying it. I feel you need to say specific words, but we know what happens, okay? 14-year-old, a 25-year-old, her diary entries name people. They name specific people. They name them and she gives us their ages. You have to understand, these were single grown men who rented these rooms, not 18-year-olds, which, still not okay. But this is not an 18-year-old. We're not talking about two kids in high school. We're not talking about a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old senior. We're not talking about a freshman and a senior. We're talking about a 35-year-old man, 25-year-old man, a man who takes advantage on screen in the movie and in real life. And who's punished for it? Pauline is punished for it. So her father, Herbert, has this wife, Louise. Oh, she's terrible. Okay. She's doing bad things to him. He meets Honora at his job, which is an accounting firm. And Herbert had goals of wanting to open up his own accounting firm one day. And Honora's father, who had died before she moved to New Zealand, her father was also, he was an accounting firm. So she was like, oh, that's awesome. Great. She's 17. He's 31. Okay. She is right now, and I have a lot of issues because if we are going by the age of consent, then she's almost 18 at this point. I don't like this at all. And I will I really look to see if there was any grooming behavior. But whether or not there were, a lot of resources say that you have to watch the language to prove that Herbert was in the up and up and not, trying to get a child to hang out and do whatever. And my brain just froze. It's frozen. What? I'm so angry. I'm sorry. I can't keep the thing straight. He leaves. So he leaves his abusive wife. He meets Honora. Honora's like, you're awesome. You're great. Whatever. They have an affair. So Honora and Herbert. And a lot of people say, oh, she was older. She was 20 when they lived as man and wife. Now, that's what I'm talking about. When you read or you hear this language, they lived as husband and wife. They were living together as this. They met at a time when, obviously, we all know, if you're going to be in any type of relationship, you need to be open. This is the time people didn't talk. People didn't even know, girls didn't even know about their periods. You would just go to the bathroom, and for centuries, up until recently, girls who got their period thought they were dying because no one ever told them. So this is the time where you didn't talk about anything, no intimacy, nothing. So her parents, Pauline's parents, then run away together. Herbert and Honora go to Ratihi in New Zealand. The police, notified by his wife, Louise, is looking for him because he abandoned his wife and kids. And now you can do that and you're just a scumbag. But back then, if I'm married and my husband disappears and I have children, I can call and say, my husband disappeared and I need him and I have kids. This is also a time when women, single women, no matter what happened, whether they got divorced, which was becoming more mainstream, but also still very stigmatized. Even up until recently, even when I was a kid, I have boomer parents. And I remember I had a lot of friends whose parents were separated or getting divorced. And the feeling was, oh, it's a broken home. And if you hang out with them, it'll I don't know, it's contagious. A lot of bad stigma today, which is probably why we have, it's still continuing, such a high divorce rate. Okay. It's like 1 in 2, because back in the day, you didn't have a say. I'm not talking about an arranged marriage. I'm not talking about any religious. I'm talking about just a mainstream generic society. So he tells police, Herbert tells Honora and police about his wife and how abusive and awful she is. And of course, everyone feels bad for him. What a terrible woman. Is there any proof that she was like this? No. And you're probably wondering, wait. Didn't you just say he had kids with her? I sure did. So he left this crazy woman who slept with a knife, apparently a knife, under her bed, who would threaten him with it and whatnot and what have you. He's frightened of her. So he runs away and he leaves his 2 kids there. Now, he then says, well, whatever my wife, whatever Louise feels about me, she's just a wonderful, loving mother. And I know she's going to take care of those kids. I'm sorry, what? Your wife sleeps with a knife under her pillow and you'll leave your kids with her? Huh? So he leaves. The police find him because they're like, hey, dude, you gotta pay. You can't just leave your wife, because women at this time, there were not jobs that many jobs that women could take. You had the gender roles also applied to jobs. You had teacher, nurse, and secretary, or housewife. That's what you had. And if you were a woman and you were going to college, you would be engaged or married, or you even had a job. A lot of jobs would fire women once they found out they were engaged or getting married or pregnant. They could just let them go. Oh, you're pregnant now. You need to be home. And there was no recourse. Women couldn't say anything. So he leaves his wife, who by societal guidelines, a single mother. What did she do wrong? What's her problem? So obviously she's this evil woman that everyone sees, but not evil enough that we can keep our children with them. Police come, knock, knock. They arrest Herbert and say, hey, dude, you suck. You left your wife. You need to pay. You need to pay child support. You need to pay alimony. Women can't really get jobs. You need to pay for her and your children. So he did for a little bit. Then he and Honora ran away again. And everything was put in Honora's name. And this is where a lot of things say they lived as husband and wife, because she changed her name to Reaper, not legally, because he was still married. And after he had paid, after Herbert gave some money to Louise and his 2 sons, the cops they were looking for him again, but he and Honora went, whoop, and they got away again. So they found him at their first house in Ratihi, where Honora put it in her name, okay? So the house is in her name so that the cops can't find Herbert. Okay, so that he can pay and give money to his wife and children. And Honora knows all of this. And this goes on again. And they just keep moving. And they had a small house, and then they got their medium house. And now their last house, which was the last and final home, was the largest house that they were able to get. And all these properties were put in Honora's name. And it was said because so Honora could get the property when Herbert died. That's sweet. It's also to hide him. Okay. So now we have this dude leaves his family, starts a new one. Okay. Starts a brand new one with Honora. They have 4 children. Unfortunately, the first one, which is the son, passes shortly after he was born due to cardiac things and cardiac complications. Then they have Wendy, who is the oldest, Pauline, who is the middle, and Rosemary, the youngest. In the movie Heavenly Creatures, you don't see Rosemary. You don't really hear about her. in some of the other content creators who have made content about this, made videos, I have a lot of different opinions. Okay. Again, two things can be true. You can be a really, really horrible piece of shit person, but you don't deserve to die. Those are two very important things. Honora was not a good person. Herbert was not a good person. I'm so sorry. One of my birds is walking around. Hi, Toast. You're just gonna walk past me. So that's why I get I get upset. 70 years have passed since this crime happened. A fully preventable crime. Preventable. This is my kind of cliff notes about this. I know it's long, but it's important to understand that when I'm getting angry and I'm getting upset, these are the facts. These are facts. Did the girls kiss and make out? Were they lesbians? If you want to go by facts, no, they did not label themselves as lesbians, which in Allison J. Laurie and Julie Glamazina's scholarly book with the proper citations, they go into this with an academic view. So they're pulling out these are facts. ABC. This is what happened. But we cannot ignore other things, such as the type of people that were raising Pauline. And not only did she not know about her parents, the movie Heavenly Creatures, they do that. They want you to know certain things. And in a movie like that, I understand you need to, give some context to certain things. And in the movie, for example, Pauline is slapped in the face by Honora. That's awful enough. But what people don't know is that didn't happen. And what I mean was, yeah, she was slapped, but she was slapped 7 times in a row. So I took that part and I created a short where I take that scene where Honora slaps Pauline and I play it 7 times in a row. When somebody is slapping somebody else, this is not little slap, 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 slap on the cheek. This is full palm or the back of her hand. I don't know how she did it. 7 times, guys. 1, 2, like she's slapping and then she's coming back and reloading to slap again. This makes me so mad. This child, guys, Pauline, was so physically abused. And this murder was the last straw. Guys, let's get real. These 2 girls were minors. Pauline had just turned 16 the month before she murdered her mother, Juliet and Perry. She was 15. And I'm going to talk about the shitty things that Hilda Hulme did and Henry Hulme. But if we're comparing parents, people see Hilda and Henry, Hilda especially, as this sexual force. And she was very sensual, very sexual, she was. But it was not to the amount what people said. And she did have an affair. Hilda did have an affair. And Henry Hulme knew. She told him. And this is not an excuse, because if she had this relationship, then I don't know if Henry knew before anything went further. I don't know. But I'm going to say these 2 things about Honora, Herbert, and Hilda and Henry. Okay. Hilda and Henry got divorced eventually. And her affair partner, Bill Perry, that's right, Perry, were then, after, when this trial was happening and after the trial, they left and then went back to England. And they remained married to each other, didn't have any other outside affairs, married to each other for then the next 40 years. And as shitty as Herbert was to Louise, he and Honora did love each other. They spent a lot of time together. They went on, they said, as juicy as the story and the affair Herbert tells, they say there are sources that say is as boring as they are a couple, because they did things together. They went on picnics and walks. They didn't have a lot of money. They lived in a very poor area in Christchurch where this took place. So the affairs are awful, but we also have to, and I try to give, like, especially back then, you have to give people a little bit of grace that they are in a marriage for social status. They were not marrying. I mean, marrying for love became obviously more mainstream as the years and years went by, from the 1800s, as we really see, like, the Victorian era, but we start seeing people marrying for affection and love and not just for convenience or dowry prices. That men and women at this time, because we're still in traditional gender roles here, they married, for love. And a lot of marriages broke up because they did not. So if Henry and Hilda are together and they don't like each other and divorce is possible, then absolutely. I don't know what the plan was when Hilda and Bill got together. I think that her plan was to divorce Henry. And like I said, he knew about the affair. And there's also rumors that they were a threesome, and there's nothing to prove that. The same way there's nothing to prove that the girls had any type of sexual relationship. But one thing is definitely clear, that whatever orientation or gender that Pauline and Juliet felt, they had a strong bond and affection for each other. And whether it's platonic love or something more, they did have this bond. Was it insane and crazy and intense? No. Are all your relationships, are all your friendships from high school, think about it. Think about one person that you really, when you were younger, teenager, middle school, college, whatever, young teen, late teen, early 20s. And you are together all the time. And you sleep over, you go to each other's houses, you take vacations together. This is what these girls did with each other. And it was not as much as people make it out to be. So the salaciousness around this entire case, there is so much. I'm still not done researching this, but it's going to take me forever. So I'm going to just be releasing stuff, and it's not necessarily going to be as neat and clean as some of my other videos because of who I am as a person. I have a lot of medical issues, and I have 2 autoimmune diseases. So I get affected, and that's me. So I will try to be, I want to try to be on a schedule, not just for the sake of people watching and continuity, but it would help me. So I'm really trying to get my shit together. My plans are to release episodes about this case and the movie, Heavenly Creatures. And then I'm going to discuss my research methods and who I emailed, who I talked to, who I called, and how to research morally and ethically, and what it means to do this type of investigating. Because it's important that all the facts come out. There are so many things said about the girls and this case that are complete fabrications. If I could score Heavenly Creatures on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being 100% true crime, 100% a true story, and the 1 being nothing, filled with facts and things that actually happened, and 100% is full, 100, no, like 10%. The murder and the people's names and the places. So I have some issues with how this case was looked at. Again, that absolutely does not mean this woman should have been murdered. But the reason that we are told she was is because the girls did not want to be separated. No. That was the last straw. The last straw. And during the entries in Pauline's diary, I will show there's patterns of abuse. It's important to see all sides. It's like with anything. It's like with the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, her side, his side. Then there's the truth. So we need to understand that there's controversy when you say something like, I'm going to defend these 2 murderers. Because in my eyes, yes, they killed this person. And there are reasons that people are not looking at, people are ignoring certain books and sources that I read for this. I read all views. I read a lot of views. Peter Graham's book, The Crime of the Century, Anne Perry and The Crime of the Century, which is about this crime. There are people who read this book and nothing else. And I have to say, there are videos, for example, Pat Brown. I know she's been a profiler for many, many years. And there are some things that I do agree with. But these girls were not evil. These girls were abused. These children were minors. They were failed. So when people crap on them, these are not, we're not talking about 2 people who are knocking over gas stations. Their behaviors begin to change very, very shortly, only like 2 or 3 weeks before the killing. They're not bad kids. They're both highly intelligent. And this is one thing, with all due respect to Pat Brown, the intelligence. Anne Perry, Juliet Hulme had an IQ of 170. She was tested. Pauline, I would not doubt, had an IQ probably maybe not as high, but definitely like 130, 140, 150. These very, very intelligent girls, but they're still girls. They're still children. And all the information about what they said, I don't believe, I'm going to say this right now. The cops, the police that said, anyone who said they're in the courtroom laughing and giggling or in the jail when they're talking about it, I believe nothing. I don't believe any of that. And number 1, there's no proof. And number 2, these girls were public enemy 1 and 2. And it's hard for some people to understand that there are people that will lie to your face and say, no, this really happened. And you can have proof that said, no, I have proof this didn't happen. And they'll say, no, it did. And the lawyers in this case and the people in this case, that's like, they want you to see these 2 children as psycho crazy lesbian killers. The only thing about that is maybe they were lesbians. Maybe. And that has nothing on this case. It doesn't matter whether they were or not, because the so-called closeness that people were afraid of, it's homosexuality, that was not as extreme as other things. Okay. Honora did not necessarily like how close her daughter may be to Juliet. But this is not a mother concerned for her child. This is not like in the movie when Pauline comes running in and puts on her favorite opera singer, Mario Lanza, and her mother goes, what did you get? Meaning a grade. And Pauline says an A. And her mother, the actress, does like a yes, like is so happy. That didn't happen in real life because Honora, by this time, Wendy, the oldest, is a year older than Pauline. Wendy is working. Where does all her money go? To Honora. Pauline is a straight A student. As punishment, her mother, now Pauline didn't want to keep going to school because at this point she and Juliet wanted to, leave and go to Hollywood, which is something that they discussed. Let's go to Hollywood. Let's be writers. So, we're a teenager. Oh, yeah. Oh, Mom, you want to pull me out of school? Cool. That's awesome. She didn't just pull her out of school. She pulled her kid out of school to make her work, to give her money. When Juliet stayed over, and she did at the Reaper home, Honora charged her parents. And yes, her parents would leave for 2 or 3 weeks. But guys, this is your daughter's best friend. Ew. Ew. This is how you treat your children. Oh, let's not talk about, the other child, Rosemary. We forgot about her because in the movie, she's not discussed at all. You wouldn't even know. Rosemary was born with Down syndrome. At this point, she was a surprise for Honora and Herbert. And at this point, Honora was 42. And we know that after the age of 35, when you are trying to get pregnant, the risk of having multiples and having children with Down syndrome, it grows, it doubles the older you get. So that doesn't mean obviously for everyone, but at this point she's 42. So having a child, and her husband at this point is in his 50s. I think he's 57 at this point. So they have this child, fully documented. Pauline loved Rosemary, loved this child. They loved her sister. She and Wendy had issues. They did normal sister things. Wendy became her spokesperson. So I want you to take that into consideration too. You have this child with Down syndrome who was then sent to a place called Templeton Farm, aka sanatorium, hospital, asylums, anything that you had that was different, you were shipped away. By the age of 3, Rosemary is at this place. They visited her a lot on the weekends. She would get to stay with them during Christmas. As much as Hilda Hulme was described as not being motherly or not being a great mother, she fixes that. Okay, she redeems herself. It's unfortunate that it took so long, because if these two sets of parents, especially Honora and Hilda, if they were paying attention more, this probably would have been a completely different scenario. Do I think Pauline and Juliet, if they had never met, would have killed anybody else? Juliet, no. Pauline, I think this with her mother, there's a huge chance that this would have happened anyway. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you the diary entries, and I'm going to show you the patterns that I see, and I'm going to lay out the facts. I have a lot of opinions. My opinions are my opinion, but facts are facts. And the facts are these. Honora and Herbert were horrible, horrible parents. There are no friends of Honora who come to speak on her behalf. Her mother, Nana Parker or Amy Parker, barely says much. And when Herbert is talked to by police, not only do we find out they're not married, which I understand at the time you don't want to tell people. That's during that time period. I understand that. But this asshole could not remember a damn thing from his daughter's illness when Pauline was little. By the age of 8, both girls had almost died. Pauline twice. She almost died. And when police are talking to her dad can't remember any of her medical history, nothing. We're also going to talk about the illnesses, tuberculosis and pneumonia, which is what Juliet had a great deal, and osteomyelitis, which is a bone infection. And before I wrap this up, because I've been yammering for way too long, the bone disease, this bacteria condition disease that Pauline had, the infection, the germs get into through the skin and down to the bone. I don't mean you cut yourself. In order for this to happen, there needs to be, which I'll also show you, medical things, medical websites and descriptions, that the skin is open because of the injury. So you have to have an injury so badly that the bone breaks or fractures. And it's such a bad injury that it also pierces the skin. So let's think maybe like a puncture, a severe stab, a horrible break, and then the infection happens because you're not taking care of it, because you have this wounds and germs get in. Pauline had osteomyelitis at 4 years old. There are no records of how she got it, no discussion about how she got it. You can only get this when that situation happens, when we have a severe break, a severe puncture wound, and it hits bone. It goes right through everything. How did a toddler get so injured that not only did her leg break, and this is from the knee to the shin, is her scar. That's like a foot-long scar. How did that happen? Even if she fell, she broke her leg, why was it not taken care of? Because if her leg was taken care of, they would have said, we went to the doctor and they had surgery. No, there's none of that. So how did she get it? I don't know. There's no information. But I can tell you, being a parent and teaching young children for over a decade, if I see a kid who's, bone is sticking out or they have this horrific injury, I'm going to be like, so how did this happen? If we have documentation from every time Juliet went into the hospital, why don't we have for Pauline? And it doesn't matter about the differences in social status. This is information that starts to shed a different light on a very old story. Actually, it's 70 years may sound old. It's really not. New Zealand is still talking about this case. So that's why it's taking me a long time and I apologize, but it's important that people need to, and if you don't want to do the research on something, I get it. I got you. I'm laying out all my sources. I'm going to be talking about who I contacted, who I spoke with, people still alive from this case, and Perry's friends. And I'm going to give you the information. And then I'm eager to see your opinion or your view. And we're not going to fight. We're not going to argue. If you think these two girls are crappy people, that's your opinion. We're going to talk about this in a respectful way when we talk amongst ourselves, because at the end of the day, this is a story about two children who should have never been treated in such a way. And Pauline, these girls be demonized? Not on my watch. Absolutely not. No way. No fucking way. They deserve better. So, as the great Samuel L. Jackson once said in Jurassic Park, hold on to your butts, because the wrathful proser is gonna get a whole lot more wrathful. Thank you for listening to this rant of 2 hours. Please subscribe. Please share. Go watch Heavenly Creatures. Go watch it. And we're going to talk more about this. It deserves to be told. It deserves to be told. Everyone, thank you for humoring me. And I'll see you next time. And stay wrathful. The murder of Honora. I'm the Wrathful Proser. You're listening to Ink Noir, where the worlds of true crime and writing collide. What happens when kids become killers? How much responsibility do we give them for their actions? What about when they reach adulthood? In the news, we've heard the names, the Menendez brothers, Gypsy Rose Blanchard.
They became part of a often misunderstood part of history. But what were the reasons for their murders? In many cases, the children who become killers have a long past of abuse. Do we forget that torture of these innocent kids happened? Do we excuse their behaviors completely? There are millions of victims of childhood abuse who don't become killers. But what happens in the minds of these children that end up with their parents dead and them facing life behind bars or even the death penalty? There are several reasons why children might commit these tragic acts of killing their parents, called parricide. Some factors are abuse, mental illness, antisocial behavior, family dynamics, the influence of others, and financial gain. A lot of these will overlap too, and that creates a more complicated case. But understanding all the reasons can help prevent such tragedies and give the necessary support and intervention for at-risk kids. In the case of Anne Perry and Pauline Parker, Pauline's mother was the victim of a horrific crime. Honora Reaper Parker was killed by her daughter Pauline with the help of Pauline's friend Juliet Hulme, which we know now is the mystery writer Anne Perry. Honora was hit repeatedly in the head with a piece of a broken brick until she was killed. Anne Perry at the time, was known as Juliet Hulme, was an English girl who befriended Pauline, who was a native to New Zealand and had more of an urban background, which we are reminded of frequently when reading about this crime. Juliet helped Pauline kill Honora, the motive being the girls wanted to be together and Honora wouldn't have it. But like the other crimes of the other children mentioned, it wasn't all black and white, and this wasn't actually the reason for the murder itself. These kids all had something in common. They were abused in some way by their parents. Gypsy Rose's mother had Munchausen's by proxy, a mental illness that causes the person to make someone else sick or helpless in a way so they can be the hero or the caretaker. Gypsy's mother kept her in a wheelchair, even though she could walk. Dee Dee created a daughter who was wheelchair-bound with countless ailments, diseases, and other conditions. She had all of her child's teeth ripped out and a stomach feeding tube placed for no reason except to gain sympathy and donations. Eric and Lyle's father was a sexual abuser, and not only to his own children, but to members of the music group Menudo. One, unfortunately, who took his own life because of that abuse. Pauline's mother was physically and mentally abusive towards her daughter, wanting to control every aspect in Pauline's life. Gypsy wanted freedom from her mother, as did Eric and Lyle and Pauline. And Anne was helping a friend who needed her. The Menendez brothers are still in prison, fighting to finally be free after spending decades behind bars. Gypsy, Anne, and Pauline all served their time under a decade and were released. But these kids didn't get any mental health help in prison or after. They were just tossed back into society, which had its own ideas about kids who kill. They then are forced to grow up assuming social norms, but failing miserably. Gypsy is floundering, surrounded by a team of people who seem not to care about her at all, and just thrusting her into a spotlight that she knows nothing about except the negative parts, which is filled with regrets, resentment, and love for a mother that she helped kill. She spent her life tortured and abused and then locked up, only to be released with no idea how to human. Because she, like so many of these violent children, were never treated like humans by their parents, and most likely not treated that way in prison either. So should we expect Gypsy or any of these kids, now adults, to act like everyone else? How should we feel, the people of society who judge them? Should we be absolute in our emotions, shutting them off for people like Gypsy or Eric and Lyle? Should we be more open to their past and how they were raised to understand them better? Do they deserve any amount of grace? Such as Pauline, who was slapped 7 times in a row by her mother, and in the movie Heavenly Creatures, which discusses the lives and murder of Pauline, Anne, and Honora, show her getting slapped once. But not only was that not true, it was also ignored that Pauline was raped multiple times, and she was 14. The perpetrator was a college professor assistant, and he was just kicked out of the boarding house that was Pauline's mother's. And instead of punishing the adult male, Pauline, the child, was punished instead. Parricide, though rare, seems to be filling up our news with kids who've murdered family or friends. We are quick to grab the pitchforks, understandably, and start charging these teen perpetrators. But I think we often forget that they're children, and the adults in their lives are supposed to protect them and teach them. Yet instead, in these cases, the adults are the ones who failed them in the first place. So where does the responsibility lie? Who do we blame for these killer kids? Society, parents, or the children themselves? The definition of lurid is very vivid in color. I just punched myself with my microphone. It's nice and soft though, so I'm okay. Very vivid in color, especially so as to create an unpleasantly harsh or unnatural effect. Shocking or sensational terms, especially giving explicit details of crimes or sexual matters. Other similar words would be sensational, melodramatic, exaggerated, overdramatized, colorful, trashy, pulp, cheap, and tasteless. So I ask, why does author Peter Graham of Anne Perry and Crimes of the Century use such shocking and exaggerated and colorful language to describe the victim's body in this case? We don't need to be shocked more, Peter. Her daughter killed her with a brick, and her friend helped. We get it. So when you use the word lurid and then you relate it to Julie Glamazina and Allison J. Laurie's book about a lesbian view, you're doing it with purpose. And this is my opinion. But the fact of the definition of lurid and then you describing the victim's blood as coagulated placenta and use words like oozing, you, sir, are being lurid. When you ignore the victim's history with her husband or not husband, because Honora was not married to Herbert. And she broke up a family because she knew Herbert was married and had 2 children and helped him hide from his first wife and only wife, because he and Honora could not get married, and his little sons by putting things in her name. So, and calling herself Honora Reaper so that they wouldn't find him, so he could pay child support and alimony during a time in 1954 where we knew that women didn't usually work. And if they did, they made so little that it would not have supported their family.
They were also looked down upon, no matter what reason was behind them now being a single mother, and everybody knew that. So he knew that, and Honora knew that when they began an affair at work. Yes, Hilda Hulme had an affair with a man named Bill. These two women both were wrong having an affair. But if we're going to start nitpicking the way Peter Graham is, you're purposely leaving information out. You have two women who had affairs. And in the scheme of things, I'm going to say that Honora's affair, if you could call it worse, was worse because she helped this man run away from his responsibilities. And this man covered up the physical abuse that Honora committed against her children. Two things can be true. Many things can be true at the same time. But yes, you can be a victim of a horrible crime and not deserve it. She didn't deserve this. But you can also still be a horrible person. And Honora was a horrible person. In films like Heavenly Creatures, the scene where she slaps her daughter once because she finds out her daughter at age 14 is found in bed with a college professor. So she's a minor, and this man had sex with her. And the age of consent at this time was 16. But ignoring all of that, she was a minor and he was an adult. So this is the type of woman that Peter Graham is purposely not giving details about, who's he is protecting, which I don't know why you would want to protect anybody who does anything wrong, especially against children. But this is the type of man who's using language like lurid. Don't look at this book by these two women that are academically inclined and professors and intelligent people. Don't look at them with facts. Look at me with all this salacious, tasteless, colorful, very vivid, lurid details. Because that's exactly what his book is. Filled with lurid, tasteless, falsified accounts, and any truths are twisted with words like these that he wants you to say, oh my God, look at all of this. Because then you won't be asking, well, wait a minute. That doesn't make sense. He doesn't want to explain or give you the reality of the situation. Here are the facts. Because there's something to hide. We know these girls did it. We know they're guilty. So why are you trying to hide behind these words? Because you don't want to give the reality that these girls, especially Pauline, were abused and they were minors. So they are not to blame in many, many ways. Again, yes, they committed this crime, but their background gives an explanation. Because why would a best friend want to do this? It's more than just, oh, we'll never see each other again. And Peter Graham putting it that simply is insulting their intelligence, especially Anne Perry with 170 IQ, and you're insulting your readers. This is why I take such a huge offense to his book. You are not giving a truthful, accurate look to this case. And that in itself is a crime. Hey everyone, I'm the Wrathful Proser, and you're listening to Ink Noir. Today I wanted to talk about how media manipulation can be obviously detrimental to reporting true crime news and how it connects to not just things in the news today, but in connection to the 1954 murder case and trial of the Parker and Hulme case. The media portrayal of true crime stories can vary greatly, but it's safe to say that we all understand that a lot of news can be rumors and dramatized assumptions. During the 1954 murder trial of teen killers Pauline Parker and Juliet Hulme, this was no different. Every movement was scrutinized and placed under a judgmental microscope. While many people were interested in learning the truth, there was also a natural want for gossip. It becomes more of an issue when that want can potentially create false news that ends up becoming unreliable and incredibly biased. It's also detrimental to criminal or legal cases, not to mention the people associated with or impacted by it. In the Parker and Hulme case in the media, like today, people were swayed by social rules and norms. In 1954, traditional gender roles were seen as threatened by specific things such as the rise in juvenile delinquents, such as Juliet and Pauline, opinionated and mouthy teens. In the eyes of society, this equaled uncontrollable kids, which could only mean they were dangerous. The rise in the subculture of teens during this time made adults absolutely besides themselves that their kids would be disobeying their orders and going against the rules. Women especially were seen as evil temptresses if they refused to act like the silent, perfect dolls they were raised to be. The two mothers also in the center of this case were the victim, Honora Parker, or Honora Reaper, Pauline's mother, and Hilda Marion Hulme, who was Juliet's, or as we know her now, to be Anne Perry's mother. The profile we see are complete opposites. Hilda was considered a sultry, sexy temptress. During this time in cinema, the femme fatale was the bad girl that all the men saw as sexy and wanted to be with them. But the femme fatale was also the essence of sexual evilness, the alluring woman who is almost like a black widow, wanting to lure men into some sort of sexual honey trap. Honora was deemed the motherly one, although her description was just as insulting. She was the matronly one, the typical boring beige Becky, hard-working housewife. While Hilda was described as a curvy, sexy panther, Honora might as well have been called a dumpy potato, which was far from the truth. Both women were often painted as attractive women, though Honora was taller and broader, also described as buxom, full-figured. So think more Marilyn Monroe than a sack of spuds. Besides the media, the portrayal of Hilda and Honora were also strikingly different in writings. Author of Anne Perry and The Crime of the Century, Peter Graham purposely grazes over the information about Honora and Herbert's affair, but drags Hilda and her affair through the mud, even creating ridiculous scenarios that never happened. He doesn't offer proof, but instead adds a great detail to some theatrical holiday party, for example, at Elam or Ilam, the house and property that the Hulmes used to live in during this time in New Zealand. He takes the time to relentlessly verbally accost the two minor-aged children, in this case, and Hilda. He dedicates page after page to tearing down Anne Perry as a writer and rips through her words, taking pains to remind us exactly what kind of writing she does. His arguments are as thin and unimaginative as his own writing. Graham frowns at lurid accounts that other authors or sources of this case may discuss, yet has no issue himself describing Honora's horrible injuries and comparing her head wounds to the coagulating bloody placenta from after childbirth. His hypocrisy is considered gospel to some who've also discussed and researched this case, including Anna Liask, a New Zealand Herald journalist. She's actually the senior crime writer, and back in 2023, Liask interviewed Anne Perry's younger brother, Jonathan Hulme. He's another winner who gives outlandish opinions and a false diagnosis of his own sister. Jonathan Hulme is the younger sibling of Anne Perry, or as she was once known as Juliet Hulme. Jonathan doesn't brag or discuss her accomplishments, but downplays her success. This is after years of being her research assistant, a rather cushy job portrayed in the documentary about Anne called Interiors. In this interview with Liask and the Herald, Jonathan Hulme speaks to feeling the need to label his sister insane, as he did in this interview. He claimed he wanted the verdict after the trial, and 71 years later, to be changed from just guilty to guilty but insane. Jonathan said he felt comfortable only after Anne passed, assumably suggesting that his sister made him feel unsafe in some way. And it was only after she died he was able to freely express himself. In reality, it was probably because Anne would not have supported him claiming she was mentally ill, because she wasn't. There was zero reason for this. It doesn't impact anything, and it wouldn't clarify anything. How would changing a verdict help anyone learn more about the mental health or capacity of Anne Perry? Hume wanted to know how he could go about changing this. However, if his goal was really to help people understand his sister in some way, why would his first inkling to be reaching out to a journalist before trying to contact a lawyer? I did think maybe he didn't have the funds to get a legal team together and maybe he needed some help, but this doesn't seem like a good use of any lawyer's time, because in addition, Juliet and Pauline also had separate legal teams, although their defense attorneys submitted their pleas together. Pauline is still alive, which means if Jonathan was successful, would it impact her verdict? During his interview with Liask, he mentions that he barely knew Pauline. So is he willing to contact her now and discuss how this verdict could change or affect her old verdict? Not that that really matters now. And letting her know that Anne's may change, but not hers? People may wonder, why would Anne's brother want to say these things that weren't true? Jonathan Hulme will have his own day or episode in this podcast. But for now, I need people to know what kind of brother he is to Anne. Although I do understand he may have some resentment and maybe insecurities, which are understandable and justified with the history. But in my opinion, I don't think he's forgiven his sister for what she did. And to be fair, those are his feelings that he has to go through. But I feel these lingering emotions of the actual crime itself is not the concern. Because why would you want your sibling to be continued to be dragged even once they're gone? Why would you continue to have people question her sanity? While speaking to some sources, though the exact words have never been said, it is strongly suggested that people close to Anne Perry do not agree nor appreciate her brother Jonathan's opinion of his sister. It's not only ridiculous, it's also unfounded. With narratives from people like Jonathan Hulme and Peter Graham, it's no wonder people only see their gossipy version of events. These sensationalized versions get clicked and shared and found more frequently. It then gets used into updated reports or anthologies about the crime. It's swept up with other falsified accounts and spread, with many unaware at the level of inconsistencies. Hilda and Honora were both English, both raised in well-to-do areas and families. Hilda married Henry, most likely for the status they both had, her in society and him in the science field. Honora and Hilda both had extramarital affairs. Hilda had an affair with William Perry, while Honora had one with Herbert Reaper. Hilda and William, or Bill, eventually got married. Honora was never legally married to Herbert and understood that she would probably never be legally married to him. She also knew that Herbert had a wife and 2 small sons. He was still married to his first wife and not divorced when he began an affair with Honora. She helped Herbert try and dodge the police when his legal wife, Louisa, reported him missing. Herbert claimed Louisa was abusive to him, with one scenario describing she would sleep with a knife under her pillow, threatening to use it on him. Herbert told this story to Honora, and Honora, believing him, then tried to help him escape his wife. Another interesting thing is he felt in danger enough to leave Louisa, but felt and said that he knew she was a perfectly safe and good mother. So leaving the kids wouldn't be a danger. Oh, okay, Herbert, because that sounds logical. So he was frightened enough for his own safety and needed to get away with his much younger mistress, but had no problem leaving his kids behind with a woman who sleeps with a knife under her pillow. One result at this time, after everyone learned about the people in this case, was the public opinion claimed the wrong mother got it, stating that because Hilda was an adulteress and not very well liked in the city, that she deserved to be bludgeoned to death and not Honora or anyone else for that matter. This idea was never shut down, but shared with lots of people. Both these mothers were involved in questionable relationships, yet the picture is not equal. The media's portrayal of true crime stories plays a significant and often powerful role. It shapes public perception and understanding of crime and the justice system. With the rise of social media, independent, freelancing citizen journalists, or as Glamour magazine calls us, mommy sleuths, it's important to remember all levels of news contributors should follow and stick to facts. Sensationalism and bias can lead to obvious misinformation, harming victims and their families and the causes they represent. It can tear good people down and apart, ruining their lives for the sake of entertainment. I'm a strong believer in sharing opinions and personal views that can help highlight important topics and give depth or a different outlook, but clarifying that they are opinions and not necessarily agreed by everyone. It behooves us to remember our opinions do count, but take a back seat to the truth. We should be striving for fair, truthful, and accurate reporting. All media sources can attempt to ensure that, yes, true crime stories are engaging, respectful, informative, but above all, truthful. Transparency is necessary and only helps to give credibility. We are all consumers of the media, whether we just watch or listen to it or produce it ourselves. It is important for us to critically evaluate the content we consume and advocate for responsible journalism. When pieces of information are taken out but found to be missing, it gives a feeling of misdirection. Why omit or disregard important details if you're telling people you're speaking the truth? After all we've seen lately in the news about media manipulation and sources outright lying, I ask, isn't it time we get some actual truth? Thank you so much for listening.